Great. So good morning. I'm going to spend just 10 minutes with you to lay some groundwork on what we're seeing in the marketplace. So I run a group within Cisco, Internet Business Solutions Group. We work with the service providers around the world. We also work with the media companies, the web companies. What we do is really try to drive kind of advanced market development. We have a strategy practice. What we do is work very closely with them to hopefully incubate, drive brand new markets. We also spend a lot of time back driving that into Cisco's business as well, back into corporate strategy, corporate development as well. So I'm going to share with you, we do a lot of proprietary research. I'm going to share work that was done more broadly within Cisco. There's a visual network index that's done within marketing, which is a very good idea in terms of the pulse of what's going on. It's actually pulsing the actual networks of, I think, 15 carriers or so around the world. But marrying that up against a lot of demand data we have, and I'm going to share with you some insights from that to hopefully lay some groundwork, and then we're going to talk a little bit about mobile video. So as we think about mobile video, one of the stories I want to say is I was on a panel at Mobile World Congress in 2008, and it was very interesting because it was all about mobile video, and it had the other 5 participants. It was a big panel. The other 5 participants on the panel were all carriers. And what I found particularly interesting is, if remember, this is pre-iPad, it's before iPad, everyone on there unanimously said mobile video was going to remain snacking. It was going to remain very small pieces of content, very short form content, etc. So here we are now, 4 years later, and granted, as the point yesterday, and it was clearly made, and I think everyone would agree, the iPad is a real game changer. But when we look at the amount of mobile video out there, it's absolutely staggering. So that's being driven, more mobile connections. When we look at overall mobile data, mobile connections, I saw somebody actually quoted IBSG yesterday in a slide that said 16 billion connections by, I think, 2020. We have Cisco, the numbers that we use, particularly for the Visual Network Index, is roughly around 10 billion connections by 2016. And those are device connections. There's roughly around another 2 billion machine-to-machine connections. Those may turn out to be very conservative, but that's clearly what's driving, when you think about the endpoints. Then we talk about sort of the faster mobile network speed. So we look at the world evolving from 2G to 3G to LTE. I mean, I have a cautious set of optimism around how fast LTE is going to be deployed in certain markets. I think the US is probably going to be pretty fast. Some of the emerging markets areas, I see everybody kind of talking about 4G, HSPA. There's a lot of things that are going on out there. But frankly, it's moving slower than people predicted 2 years ago. So nevertheless, though, that's sort of laying the groundwork on what's going on there. Then we look at sort of mobile users. We're quickly approaching kind of the 4 billion mark of mobile users around the world. But then as you look at kind of mobile video is the game changer in terms of the actual loads on the networks and the actual bits that are transcending the network. So one of the things that we do is we kind of look at, at 2016, when we look at mobile video, just to kind of put things into perspective, there's 130 times. So think about in the dot-com era, back in 2000, at the height of the dot-com era, the IP traffic, and obviously we're out there, Cisco was we were the crack dealer of IP, we frankly were out there. In fact, that's exactly what IBSG was born, is to evangelize the use of IP. And we're looking right now at video in 2016 to be 130-fold the entire IP traffic in the year 2000. So that just puts it, and you can talk about, and Pat mentioned yesterday the what a zettabyte really consists of. But you look at that in terms of 33 billion DVDs, and it's you start getting into kind of nomenclature around sizes that looks like a Bugs Bunny term. I get into the quadzillion, well, the bazillion kind of level. But just the staggering amount of traffic, when you put it into perspective, is really kind of scary. As we look at video, though, what's driving that traffic? So by 2016, 71% of all that mobile traffic is going to consist of video. And that's what's really kind of, when we look at this and kind of put it into perspective, back to my point 4 years ago when people said, oh, it's only going to be snacking, it's only going to be that kind of activity. Well, the reality is long-form content has found the mobile device, thanks to the iPad. Now, granted, the iPad, still north of 90% of all the traffic on the iPad is going over Wi-Fi. And, but nevertheless, that 10% is staggering in terms of what it's doing to the licensed spectrum networks. And just talk to any carrier in terms of what the implications are to that. The other factors as you kind of look in here, but this is just to kind of give you the other categories. People always ask me, why is gaming so small? Well, gaming it's interesting because the way that they've done a lot of the compression on gaming, a lot of the gamesmanship that they've done in order to make gaming work well and to kind of normalize the gaming experience for, especially when you get into multiplayer games, they've actually optimized the network. And one of the things that I can say, I honestly think what's going to evolve in the mobile video space is we're at a point where if we stay on the current trajectory, we're going to start breaking networks. And I think that what's going to have to happen is you're going to start seeing a collaboration between the content providers, the network providers, to really kind of optimize that asset. We can't, you know, everyone knows, I mean, you can read the press out there, we can't necessarily create new spectrum. And there's some significant challenges in terms of optimizing that. The other thing we want to talk about is the behavior of consumers, you know, the end users of video. And as we kind of look at that from a standpoint, there's three things to take away from this. One is the iPads. So I'm saying iPads, but it's pads in general. Everyone knows it's dominated by Apple these days, and maybe that'll change. But when we look at 2015, of 130 million of those, and those are just in the US, but you look at the kind of staggering growth that an iPad drives compared to a smartphone, and it's very, very significant. But then look at what the revenues are here. And what Eric and I were talking about this earlier in terms of how is video, what's the business model going to evolve as video? Those are not massive numbers. You know, when we look at kind of mobile video revenue growing from 550 million to roughly about 1.3 billion, that's not a lot. Well, the reality is, there's a lot of I call covert revenues. Those are revenues that are flowing in other ways. They're flowing into subscriptions. So when Comcast has a TV Everywhere solution that has a component of it that's mobile, it's actually driving indirectly revenues within their core franchise. So there's a lot of other contra revenue, you can call them anything you want. But I think what's important here is the direct remuneration business model is still rather precarious. And I think that's one of the topics we should take up here today is how do we see the business models evolving? Because at the end of the day, the content providers are looking for ways that they can obviously create new consumption experiences. And that's going to foster innovation, but that's going to have to go, I mean, there's no free lunch. That's going to have to go hand in hand with new innovation on the business models. The other thing that's important is in terms of the TV experience. Up until about three quarters ago, we really were looking at, ironically, people talked about their free time yesterday. We heard that in the kickoff yesterday. You're not creating more free time, but ironically, internet time has been going up over the last 10 years. At the same time, TV time had not been dropping off. It had been going to time shifting and some other pieces, but up until 3 quarters ago, it was still looking, frankly, it was flat, but nevertheless, it was not dropping off. We're starting to see cracks in the foundation, particularly in the younger segment. You know, no surprises there. But that's a pretty important aspect of it as well. The last thing, the third thing that I want to talk about is the idea of coexistence or contextual, you know, the importance of contextual multitasking. So now what I want to know is I'm on the TV, and I actually challenge that question about infusing social media. Every piece of research I've seen has shown that most consumers do not want to infuse social media directly into the TV experience, but rather maybe commingle it on another device or another experience that coincidentally is happening in a multitasking environment. So it's a very important thing because I see a lot of the service providers, especially the video service providers, talking about putting social media embedded within the TV experience. So that's a little bit of a challenge and a little bit of a caution on that. But the important thing is the opportunity, particularly for the mobile and the mobile carriers, to once again say, hey, Chris is in front of his TV. He's watching the NCAA finals. And at the same time, he's sitting there on his iPad having a different experience. Well, that can actually be done. And that's contextual based. When we talk a little bit about big data, that's a significant opportunity. The other point that I want to make is that, when we look at traffics, the pads, in terms of the actual traffic so if you look at all the mobile data in 2010, the amount of mobile data traffic generated by tablets will approximately equal to all the mobile data that was consumed or generated in 2010, just to put things into perspective in terms of how important tablets are to the overall growth. Now here's where I want to land too, and I'm going to land on the last page on some considerations. One thing that we want to make sure, though, is that in our research, we've shown that, and we do a lot of consumer research. Well, it's kind of scary. We do a lot of consumer research. One of the things that's important is that a lot of that traffic, I call it not the mobile experience, I call it the untethered experience. Overwhelmingly, the amount of mobile data, and particularly in mobile video, is consumed in and around a fixed location. It's consumed around the home, around businesses, and ultimately around Starbucks or any other place that's kind of a localized location. That creates significant opportunities, particularly for the carriers, to get creative on how they may be able to use other types of spectrum to optimize that experience. And you're going to see business models absolutely evolve that are going to encourage and incent end users to, in fact, do that. And one of the things that's important here is that's actually grown. So we did analysis in 2009, then did it in 2011, and that skew is actually increasing even more. So it's very important here, once again, to think about how do I sort of optimize the network resource, how do I actually optimize the experience, and it's really going to get to a point of how do I use all the assets I've got in my arsenal. So let me land on considerations here. When I think about this, there's just a number of things that you really want to think about. One is, obviously, we all love our content, so we've got to find ways that ultimately the media companies, Eric's going to touch on this in a few moments, but how do they effectively, and they're looking for a lot of creative ways to sort of next generation monetization of their content, because it's all about a lifetime value. And the beauty about sort of personalization and some of the data and analytics that goes on, you know, one of the media companies that I work with was talking about Netflix, and they were talking about that personalization engine, how that's been able to revive and resuscitate content that was like 10 years old. Content that they thought had a terminal value of X suddenly has a value of like 3X because they've been able to revive that and figure out the exact users. You know, remember the idea of long tail? Well, pretty interesting environment. The other is on terms of the network providers embrace and enable next generation mobile video experience without breaking the network. I sort of drove this home before. I mean, let's not be naive here, okay, in terms of it's, you know, we all want a great experience. We all want it, you know, as much as we want, and we all want it for $30 a month. Well, there's some frail assumptions in that overall model. But then as we try to look at alternative routes, once again, it's about creating those experiences. Let's use all the assets in our arsenal, which include things like unlicensed spectrum and how they necessarily can be used and optimized within the network.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Great.